Friends, welcome. I think that coding is challenging, and I think that we are learning how to think our way through things here together. I think the reason that this class is worthwhile is that it challenges you to use the tools that you have to come up with a solution to a real problem, and there's a certain extent to which you kind of just need to sit with that to figure it out. You're developing skills of independence as you work through this class. That said, I do, want to give you the chance to make sure that your thinking is on the right track. And I'm feeling really good about our understanding of while loops and how they work and the code tracing that we've been doing during class. But what I want to make sure is that we're actually able to write some programs that can solve problems with while loops, which is why I've created videos for this and for lesson 2 coding activity number 1. Expect there to be a problem on your test on Monday that requires you to use a while loop in your code. And I'm going to do my best to kind of help you think as you approach a problem like this of what questions you would need to answer and maybe what steps you could take to break down this bigger problem into something that's a little bit of a smaller chunk. I gave the solution out to this in class, but I do want to be comprehensive in talking about how you might start on something like this from scratch. Write a program that requests the user input positive numbers until they input -1. Then print the sum of all numbers. So for example, in this problem, the person puts in 3, 7, 8. When they put in -1, this is all of their input, the user's input. The code should stop taking input and print out the sum of all of the numbers. 3 plus 7 plus 8 is 18. And then stop once we get to -1 in this particular case. So again, these numbers are inputs. Your program should sum them all together, and it should be able to take as many as possible. The first thing that I think is a helpful question to think about, which I was always asking when we scaffolded it, was, does this need a while loop? Well, let's think about it for a second. The problem asks you to request a number until the person puts in -1, until they do that at some point in time. So the question that you're asking yourself, if you're asking if they need a while loop, is do they need to do the same thing multiple times? In this case, yes. They need to do the same thing multiple times. So we know that a while loop is necessary here because this takes in number after number after number until you put in -1. If you've figured out you're using a while loop, the next question you want to ask is, when should it stop running? Check to yourself, read the problem real quick if you need a little reminder of that. When I look at this problem and I think, when should it stop running? Our answer is when the user puts in -1. So here are some things we can figure out so far. In our demo code, it asks us to print out, at the very least, enter the positive numbers, -1 to stop. We said it needs a while loop. And you are going to take in some sort of number at first. Maybe after you first print enter positive numbers. We know that this is always going to take in at least one number at first. And at class today, we said we wanted to check if the user is putting in -1. Which is our cue to stop. Here's where I think this gets a little bit trickier. what should it update on each loop? This is a question you need to ask yourself. Remember, our if statement makes a decision inside of its brackets every time, while is continuing that to make that decision every single time. So when you're asking yourself, what should it update inside of each loop? I would go back to the problem prompt and ask yourself, what is it asking for each time? Why does it need a while loop in the first place? What is it doing multiple times? Look at the sample run and ask to yourself, what is this thing doing multiple times? In my opinion, what it does multiple times is it prompts the user for an input again. It asks the user to go and put another number in. It says put it in again, as long as it's not equal to -1. Now we've defined that there's a value called number at the top here. So we can simply update its value by putting number equals scan.nextInt inside of our while loop. And at the very least, if I run my code now, and I have the right amount of brackets, and I remember to put the insert the scanner line of code. Make sure you do that yourself. This code prompts me for numbers. You can see it continues to do that. The cursor keeps finding until I put a -1, and then the program ends. But there's one more piece to this. How do I find the sum? I know that finding the sum is part of this problem of all the numbers put in. So I'm going to create a variable int sum equals 0 that keeps track of it. And then at the bottom, I'm going to print out the sum once I find it. I think the hardest part of this entire problem is understanding what to do next. The first question to ask yourself, if we're going to sum up numbers that are being put in, then we need to add something every single time a new number is put in. I'll say that one more time, I'll write it down. If we need to sum up numbers, we need to add to the sum when a number is put in. So the first question that we need to ask is, where do we modify or add to our sum within the code? Where do we modify or add to our sum within the code? We said we need to add to it when a number is put in. So I know that I actually want to do that within my while loop. I want to modify the sum within my while loop. And I'm adding whatever the most recent number is that was put in. The way that I continually add to the value of a variable is with this plus equals. We've seen it with a string many times, and a number sign. This is interesting though. For this problem, when I put this component in, my sum doesn't add up to the expected value. It says the sum is 14 instead. In order to make this program run correctly, and this is one quirk at the end of it, you can put sum plus equals number before number equals scan dot next int. Because if you don't do that, it'll actually change the value of number once again before you add it to the sum the first time through. And if you don't put sum plus equals number at the top here, whenever this line of code reads in your -1, it's gonna add it immediately to the sum that would follow if it were right below this point. And that would actually subtract 1 away from the total that you should have. Oops, went a little too fast. Let me try to run that code one more time. Now I've got a working piece of code. I'm going to comment on my while loop just to make sure that we're good of what the components are. Number is the read-in value. And we should run our code until somebody puts in -1. Sum adds up the read-in values. By putting plus equals, every time this while loop runs, it's going to continue to add the newest number that you put into the code. And number equals scan.nextInt prompts the user for the next number. Prompts the user for the next number. If you've got questions, feel free to reach out to me. This is probably pretty similar to the while loop problem that might be on your test in the coming days. And this is pretty similar to the password code you've read before, where it said like prompt until we get a certain password. The only difference is that this is summing up the numbers each time as we go through.